So we're going to continue on with our selection tools, some of the more esoteric ones. As well, we're going to touch on smart objects, which are super cool. And we'll start with smart objects. First of all, if you don't know what smart objects are basically a container that retains the original information of an object. And objects could be a raw file, they could be a layer, they could be multiple things. But because it's referencing that data, so what you're doing is you're changing basically a reference of the full-size image. Let me give you an example of this. Okay, so I opened up this image here, and this is just a beauty image that I shot a while back. First thing I'm going to do before I'm going to explain what this dialog box comes up to. So this is your Adobe RAW dialog box, and you'll see it. Anytime you try to double-click a raw file, this is the dialog box you'll see. What most people never probably clicked on is right down here. Under the image, you will see the actual name of the file, as well as the color space, how many of the bit depth, the physical dimensions, and as well as the dots per square inch. If I click on that, I get a workflow options dialog. Now by default, on the bottom where it says Photoshop, open in Photoshop as smart object, by default this is unchecked. So the way I got that is I was actually in this image before, so all I did was I clicked on this link. It's a hyperlink. You just click it, this window pops up, and then I check that and I hit OK. So now you'll see it says Open Object on the bottom. What happens if that's off, I click that off and I hit OK. Now it says Open Image. The difference being is one's going to open it up as an image file, your standard image file, which I've been teaching the past few classes, and the other one's going to open it up as a smart object. And we're going to do that because there's a lot of cool features. So actually I'm going to do this both ways. We're going to compare them side by side, smart objects versus standard images. So let me first open this image as is without converting it. So let me go Open Image. Okay, so we're in its own image file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size of my canvas. So the keyboard shortcut I always use to increase the size of my canvas is Option Command C for canvas, or on a PC it would be Alt Command C, or Control, Alt Command C. So canvas size. So what I want to do is I want to extend it to the right, because I basically want to put these images sort of side by side next to each other with a different color frame. So right now, if you look at my current size, it's 61.1 megs, my width is 33.987 centimeters, and my height is 45.18. You might ask why I work with centimeters as opposed to imperial. It's because my sister's a graphic designer and she lives in Dublin. So we work with files a lot, and it's much easier to work on the same physical dimensions. As well, I like to slide decimals around instead of divide by 12, but that's me. So I prefer metric when I'm working. But of course, if I'm working on strictly American presses with American document files, I will switch my settings to imperial or inches. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to extend it to the right. So I'm going to anchor. You got this little dialog box down here, and whichever arrow you click is where it's going to anchor. I want to anchor this to my left side, so I'm going to click the left side. Notice how the whole thing shifts over. And now I just want to adjust the width. Actually, I'll adjust the width and size. So I'm going to approximately double this. Let's go to 70. So, and I want to increase my height just a little bit so I can make a border. So let's go up to about 50 on this. And then what I'll do is I'm going to change this to white as my background color on here. Then I hit OK, and ta-da! Now I got a much bigger canvas, and I'm going to duplicate this image and I'm going to turn it into a smart object. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit V, which is the shortcut for the Move tool, or it's the double arrow tool up here on the tool palette on the left. And I'm just going to slide this over just a little bit. Well, I'm locked, first of all, so I've got to double click this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this white area. So in this case, because it's a really clean image, I'm just going to go and grab a simple tool, such as my quick selection tool, because it's going to be really easy. And there we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my selection, because right now the white is selected, and I actually want this image to be selected. So what I'm going to do is Shift-Command-I, which inverts my selection. So now you see the selection is just on the actual image itself. And what I want to do is I want to duplicate this onto its own layer. So I'm going to go Command-J, which is copy via duplicate. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this over a bit. So I'm going to hit V for the Move tool. I'm going to slide it over. But if you notice, the image under it is right below it. So I don't want that anymore. I'm just going to click on the underlying layer. I'm going to fill this with white. Does anybody remember the keyboard shortcut to return the two swatches, the color picker swatches, to X? Well, that exchanges them. What's the keyboard shortcut that restores them? It's D for default. So you just hit the D key. Close, but very right. So X exchanges them from white to black or black to white, and D always brings you back to your default, which is white as your background color and black as your foreground color. So now that I have my underlying layer 0 selected with my canvas, I want to fill the whole thing white. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is Command Delete. Okay, so the bottom layer, as you see, is fully white now, and then on top, I have my layer with just the image, and you can see the transparency around it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, so Command J. So I got a copy, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it over to the side. So I got my Move tool, and I'm just going to drag this on over. Like this. I'm going to drag the first layer over to the left a bit, so we get a little bit of daylight between them. It's not critical, I just like things to be somewhat symmetrical. It's part of my perfectionist nature. Okay, so now we have two images that are identical, and right now they're both standard image layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn one of them into a smart object, and the way to do that is you just double click on your layer, or in this case I'm hitting Control clicking, and then what you do over here it says Convert to Smart Object. So I'm going to click on Convert to Smart Object, and if you see there's a little icon right down here. That little icon denotes that there's a smart layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my layers. So this is going to be called Smart. And since this is not a smart layer, we're going to call this Stupid. So we have a stupid layer and a smart layer. Okay, now I want to show you something interesting. So if we grab these two layers together, so I just hit the Shift key, so now they're both highlighted. I'm going to hit Command T, which is the keyboard shortcut for Free Transform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce these way down in size. So instead, I'm just going to grab the up top. I'm going to link these two together. And let's drop these down to a small size. Let's just go down to 5% of the original size. As you see, it's quite small. So I'm going to hit Apply. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command T again, and then we're going to enlarge this. So I'm going to hold Shift to constrain proportions and drag, and look at this, folks. Look what just happened. Okay. Now, so you can see it clicked back in place, but it's still much, much softer. It's going to be hard to see, but as you can see, the image quality is much reduced on the left than on the right. Now, the reason why this is, what's actually happening internally in Photoshop. So on the right side with our smart object, it's actually referencing a pristine image, this image from where it originally lives. And so it's basically making a size box, and it could go up to whatever that physical size resolution is. So when we're doing with a regular layer, it's basically taking that information, throwing it away when we reduce it, and then I'm trying to stretch those pixels out again. So trying to make information where it didn't exist. Whereas with the smart object, it's always referencing that perfect, pristine image. So as long as you're not restretching it bigger than the physical original size of that image, you will be fine. So I always use smart objects. Especially when I'm doing photo comping like this, and I'm taking many pieces of images and comping them together into one image. So I always use them because you don't have to worry about scaling. Okay, so that shows you the basic difference. Actually, to really repeat this, let's do this one more time. So let's go Command T, and let's go again. Let's take this down even to the same size. So we'll click on that. I'll go to 5% of its original size. I'll apply it. And I'm going to go Command T, and I'm going to move this, oops, I'm going to move this over to the corner. And I'm going to drag it out. It's going to hold down the Shift key to constrain my proportions. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to hit OK. Now you can see it's even worse, because every generation I do this, you're going to throw more and more information away. And so that's one of the major things is scaling. There's a bunch of other cool things you can do with smart filters. So let me close these two images, because I just wanted to show you the difference of scaling side by side. Now what we're going to do is open up another image. Actually, I'll open it from Bridge instead. Okay, these are. Here's some pictures I took in Dublin. I went to visit my sister, so we'll get this flamenco guitarist. Okay, so I want to show you how to open up. Let's go back quickly. Sorry, I want to go back to Bridge. Let me find a raw file here somewhere. Okay, this is a raw file here, so I'm going to click back to a lady. So this is a raw file, so I'm going to go click back on my Adobe, the bottom. So as you said, it says open image. So if I click here, and then what I do is I click down, it says open in Photoshop a smart object. I can click down here, hit OK. And then when I open up object, it opens this. This by default happens on the new Creative Cloud. It's not something that I actually need. So don't show again, good. Okay, so now this image is open as a smart object. Now watch what happens when I double click on this guy. It opens back up in my raw dialog box. Isn't that pretty cool? So if I open it up, a raw file as a smart object, I could actually revert, come back, make all my adjustments, then I could go back, make more adjustments. And if you open up as a standard image file, it'll take all of this stuff, and then what you have to do is go back to a raw editor such as Bridge or Lightroom, make your adjustments, and open it again. This way you could go, as a layer, you could keep revisiting the adjustments and make them that way. So that's another cool thing. So let me check out the image here. Let me make it a little bit smaller so I can see the whole thing. That actually looks pretty good. Highlights aren't blown out, blacks are good. I might want to pump up my exposure just a touch. Let's go up by there we go, by about quarter of a stop. And I may want to pump up my vibrance just a little to get a little more color in the skin tone. Okay, I like that balance. And if I hit OK, and now it's my smart object. Okay, other cool things you could do is on smart objects. So let's say we apply a blur filter. Okay. So normally, as you guys know, is if you apply a filter to a selection or to an image, once you're done, you're done. Unless you take duplicate that layer, you start with an unfiltered image, and then you always have that pixel information, then you duplicate that, and then you blur that, and then you're done. The really cool thing about this is, so we got, say, smart filters now. So when I double click it, I could change all of my feather, my ratio, my density. I could do all of that fun stuff after the fact. So let me go back to my blur. And right over here, you will see the actual dialog box. There's like a couple of lines with a couple of triangles, and that lets me adjust stuff. So let's say we want to, right now you got a normal blending option. This gives me the ability to change all my blending options after the fact, which in this case I don't want to do, but it's pretty cool. So I could actually change my blending options as well. So I could do all of these things after the fact, and then I could go back and change them over and over again. So that's another advantage of smart filters, is being able to change all of these dialog box and everything else after the fact, which is really nice to do. So that's another reason why I suggest to use smart objects. Okay, so let's open up our flamenco guitarist again. Okay, so I'm going to convert this image to a smart object. And I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to start in a new file, so I'm going to Command N. And I'm going to drag that layer. I'm hitting the V key for move. I'm going to click, drag, go up to that tab, and click it until it shows up. Hold it with the paper and drop. There it is. Okay, so okay. So the original layer, here, let me close this for a second. Okay, so you have these two images. So one, I just basically opened up in Photoshop. I converted it into a smart object. And I just duplicated that and I dragged it into a new document because I just wanted to show you two different documents sort of with the same image. Okay, so if I go back to my original doc and I double click, I'm going to get the original image. So this automatically opens up a PSB.PSB, which is Photoshop Big. So if I apply an adjustment layer to this, let's say I wanted to add a, say, hue sat layer. I really wanted to increase my saturation substantially, make it like a nice warm sunny day. And then I save that. And give it a minute. See, it's going to update my two smart objects on those layers because they're both linked to the same layer. So the cool thing is if you have like multiple iterations, say you're doing, as again, a travel brochure, and if you link all of the layers to the same one, you could just update the master image and it'll update in all files that are linked to that one smart object. So that's another really cool thing about smart objects. Okie doke. I'm going to open up a new image, so Command N. I'm just going to open up a little white image because I'm going to do something interesting. So let's draw some colored shapes. So I'm going to click on my color picker, and let's click, say, red. And let's make some fun shapes. So right down here. So basically, the third one down from the bottom is your shape tool. So the shape tool consists on the top of your rectangle, then down to your rounded, your ellipse, your polygon, your line, and your custom shape tool. For now, let's just choose rectangle. Rectangle's fine. So I'm going to hold down Shift key to constrain proportion so it makes it an actual square. And I'm going to do that a couple of times. And since my foreground color is red, it's going to make all these red for me. So I'm going to just do all of these little checkers. Okay, so after we're done, I think I'll go to the galleries on the west side and sell this for 30 grand. What do you guys think? It's a lot better than some of the stuff they're showing. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so I'm going to move this last one in. Beautiful. Okay, my modern art. Okay. So under the Select menu, there's something called Color Range, which some of you may or may never have explored before, but this is a handy tool for making selections. So let's click on Color Range, and let's check out this funky dialog box. Okay, so on top, you have sampled colors. You could choose individual colors, or you can choose by density, or you could choose skin tones. For now, I'm going to do sampled colors. And then down here, of course, detect faces, which we don't have here, but you could. Localized color clusters is usually what I like to leave on. And then you get to fuzziness and range. Fuzziness is sort of like ISO on your camera. So the more you crank up your ISO, the more sensitive it is, but the more noise you get. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So because now we have unsampled, so let's sample a color. So I'm going to sample here. And notice, you got white and some little bits of shades of gray down here. Okay, so what that means is it's sampled 100% where it's pure white, and where it's gray it's sampled somewhat, and where it's black it's not selected at all. If I pull up my fuzziness, it's going to affect normally a bigger area, as you see when I sample. I could sample from each of these. And what I could do is I could hold down my Shift key to add to that sample. And you got to realize the reason why it's not selecting the whole thing, even though these are the exact same color that I put down, is because I have localized color clusters activated. If I turn it off and I select one of them, you'll see they'll all perfectly select by themselves because it's selecting all the colors that are that way. So it depends upon what I'm doing. If it's localized, which means a connected or homogeneous group of color that I want to choose, I'll leave that on. If they're separate and separated by another color, I'll do it that way. So you click once and they're all selected, which is pretty cool. So what happens if I hit OK is now you got all selected. All your selections are active. Something else you could do as well. So let's go back to that same one. Select. Let's go to Color Range. Okay, so what you could do if you click on that, so they're all selected, great. You can also invert the selection too, because say I wanted to select the white as opposed to the red or whatever. I could select them inverse. Whichever is the easier color to grab, I could select. And remember, once I make my selection, I could always invert them. remember the keyboard shortcut to invert your selection? Shift Command I. As you can see, that's just the red squares. And if I go Shift Command I, that is the white canvas behind it. So color range could come in super, super handy for a lot of other things which you're doing. And another thing I want to do is called Quick Mask, which a lot of people may or may not have used. So let me close this, Command W. I'm going to close this image. And let's open up Victoria again. So we got a lot of play today. Let's add some little bit of exposure to it. Let's just pump it up just a touch, let's go about a quarter of a stop. Dial in the numeric value 1.25, so I'm bumping it up 2.25, just giving it a little more specular highlight. And let's bump up our vibrance, because I want to get a little more color in the skin specifically for the example I'm going to give you. Okay, that looks great. Open object. Okay, she's open. So now, there's many ways we could do this. So say I wanted to select our lip color, because I want to change the lip color, which is something very, very common, especially if you're doing cosmetics or beauty photography. And also sometimes people are colorblind, so they'll put on a color that doesn't really work with the outfit they're working. They may think it looks great, and then it's pretty tragic, and then, they're in the tabloids, and it's a horrible story. But there's always ways to fix things afterwards. So let's go over different scenarios of fixing these lips. Okay, so the first thing I could do, let's try what we just did. So let's go to Select, let's go to Color Range, and let's select some of this. And so I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and the problem is as you can see, it's not doing a great job because there's so many tones, and her skin has a lot of that similar reddish color. It's on smaller amounts, but it's still part of it. So this is not a very good selection tool for this match. You could always use the pen tool, which I went over last time, which I'll probably touch on again today as a refresher because it's a super important tool. But let's do something easier. It's like, somebody goes, Jason, couldn't I just paint on my selection? Why, yes, you can. So down here, underneath your color swatches, your foreground and your background color swatches, is this little guy, which is a square with a circle. This is something called your Quick Mask. So what happens if you click it, notice what happens. This gets highlighted in red. Now, once it's in red, you're in Quick Mask mode. So what you want to do is grab a brush. So I'm going to grab a brush here. I just want to make sure that all my settings are off, because I always have usually something pretty funky going on down here. Let's turn off smoothing. Okay. And let's go back in. Brush to shape, shape dynamics. Okay. And let's go to a normal brush style. So, something like this. Yeah, that works nice. Okay, let me close this dialog box. Okay, so if you notice, if you look at my color picker, I got black as the foreground and white as the background. I'm not painting with actual color. This is just a mask. So whatever turns this red color will be selected. So, and that's another reason to use a Wacom, because trying to do this with a mouse or a brick is a real pain in the behind. So I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, and let me just paint on this mask for just her lips. So I'll probably do this. I'll probably go to a smaller brush, and I'll do a little bit of a lip liner. And then I'll get a bigger brush, of course, and I'll just paint in the space in the center to save time. As you can see, I'm not a fine artist. I apologize. Okay, almost there. Just a little bit of tweaks. Let me get that little piece of lip. And this comes sort of up and over. Okay, let me make my brush a little bit bigger and paint in the rest. So Quick Mask is a really sort of quick, down and dirty way, especially if you're good at painting or better than I am. This is always a good method for doing this. Because remember, it's all about selections. All that stuff we went over last time, and then we're going to do right after this, is we're going to go to some more selections and more changing and stuff like that. Okay? So that's our Quick Mask. So there's a couple of ways. If I hit Q again, it turns into a selection. You're leaving quick mask mode and you're back in the selection. The cool thing though is if you hit Q again, it'll still remain there until you go on to something else. So you could go back and you could edit. But for instance, so you could go there, or you could click on that same icon. Instead of hitting the Q key, I could just click on that same icon and you got your selection. Okay, so now that I have my active selection, let's go change our color. So I like using adjustment layers for this. So let's go up to and use selective colors, usually my go-to. The reason being is because I think I mentioned this in previous classes. I'm a printer's son. My old man's a printer. So I grew up in graphic art. So I used to do something called color separations that you had to do in the old days. Now it's pretty much automated. But I had to actually balance or adjust each image for pre-press and get it ready. So back in the day, we used to have monochrome monitors. We didn't have color monitors. So the way I would do it is by numbers. Like Caucasian skin is certain percentages of yellow versus magenta. For instance, in pale Caucasian skin is 0 cyan. As you get to African American and darker skin, you start adding cyan and other colors. But I could judge if the color balance is right just by looking at the numbers, so that's what I'm used to. But you can use any tool you'd like to adjust the lip color. So now we're in reds because that's primarily the thing. So let's make these a little less magenta. So I'm going to move down.
What menu is that?
Oh, so I'll show you again. So let me get out of this menu. So the way I got there, let me undo a couple of times. So I have my active selection. So I'm going down to the bottom, which is the dark side of the moon icon, which is half white and half black, which is the adjustment layers. Click on that, and then I choose selective color at the bottom. So now that I'm on the selective color, what I want to do is let's pump up, if we pump up our magenta, and if you notice, right now it's affecting her skin color. So we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to command click. Actually, I'm going to click the layer mask. I'm going to go command I. So now it was actually selecting the whole image before because I had an inverse, so now it's on just her lips. Okay, so now we have an active selection. I'm going to make a layer mask. There we go. Okay, so let's add a little more magenta, add a little more sort of yellow, make it a little redder. If we actually go to the magentas, which our lips pretty much are, we'll also have some adjustments. So let me add a little more magenta, a little more yellow, maybe make them a little deeper. So let's see, I could just like pump them up just a little bit. But that's how you use quick mask. So that's another quick way of doing it. So if you didn't want to make selections, you could do quick mask, but as soon as you apply the effect, it's gone. So I still prefer a method such as paths with the pen tool that I showed you last time, because that's infinitely editable as you go through. But if you see that, or if you grab someone's file, and if the stuff looks really weird and all red, or the actual layer is red like this, you know the reason why is because you're actually in quick mask mode. So you could either click down here, and you'll see it. In the normal mode, it's sort of like a square with a dotted circle in the center. When you're actually in quick mask mode, it's going to be a solid white with a dark circle. And also, you're going to be highlighted here. So as soon as you leave quick mask mode, you'll be there. So it's something to know. Moving right ahead. So, quick review. Let's go through the tool palette and see what we know and we don't know. So the top one is just your move tool. Keyboard shortcut is V. I know V stands for move. Don't know how that came out, but it's one of the anomalies of Photoshop. So anytime you want to move something, the V key. For selection tools, the Marquee tools are very, very popular. So you could either do rectangular, elliptical, or single row and single column. The single row and single column, you probably guys are never going to use. But the rectangular and the ellipticals you can use all the time. So to draw the Marquee, you can either hold down the Shift key to constrain proportions, or you could just freeform it and it'll draw whatever size you want. The other cool thing you could do is you could actually draw in physical sizes. So on the top bar on your nav bar over here, so you have normal, fixed ratio, and fixed size. So say I wanted a specific size that I wanted to put in. So I could do a fixed size, and I could put in my width and my height. or I could do a fixed ratio, which is pretty cool. Because say that you're shooting your camera and you know your camera is a certain aspect ratio, the actual image from width to height is a certain percentage or aspect ratio. So say you wanted a background that matched that, you could easily do that by setting a fixed ratio and drawing it out smaller or bigger to that specific fixed ratio. For instance, say I wanted the image to fit in 16:9 because I wanted to cut one of my still images into a video I'm producing. So if I want to know that that image exactly fits the frame, so say I wanted to crop this image to fit into a 16:9 ratio. Obviously 16:9 is this, it's actually horizontal. And you guys have a HD TV, which probably all of you do, unless you have a very old TV with an expensive converter box. It's going to be 16 width by 9 height. Obviously this wouldn't fit great, so let's do that. So let's going to go a fixed ratio of 16:9, and it's one of the presets actually, so 16:9's there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this out, and it automatically does that ratio. So I know that if I crop this here, so if I go image, crop, and now I have an exact image at 16:9 perfect ratio, so it'll fit exactly into that space. So I use Marquees a lot as well for cropping into ratios or cropping to specific sizes. Okay, so your lasso. Lasso is for quick selection. So it's something that already has a lot of color like here. So say I wanted to do like real detailed work, and I thought that this cat was a little too red for my taste. I could take my lasso and I could just quickly draw around. Whee! So I wanted to make this kitty cat a nice natural shade of blue. Okay, I got a pretty big 20 pixel feather on that, so I could just take an adjustment layer and hue saturation, and then I could turn this guy blue. There we go. Purple blue kitty. So those are something, just quick grab. That's great for the lasso tool. But again, a lot of times I'll use it if I'm going to make a quick selection. For example, if I go back to Bridge for a second, let's do Megan. It's a much bigger file. Okay. So say arbitrarily that she had, let me grab a lasso. I'm just going to grab around her eye. I already have a 20 pixel feather. So I'm going to duplicate this onto its own layer. So Command J, which is duplicate via copy. So now I got my eye on its own layer. So now I'm going to transform this just to make it a little weirdo. So I'm going to hold down Control, click, and I'm going to go down to, let's warp this image. Let's make it a little funky. So maybe her eye actually looks like this in real life. Okay. No one will look twice at that. Looks normal, right? Okay, so say we had a subject that actually looked like this, and we wanted to fix it the normal way without a plastic surgeon, or it'd probably take more than a plastic surgeon to fix that eye. But then again, I'm not a doctor. So the way I would go about it is I need information that's accurate to reference. So I'm going to use both this eyebrow and this eye. So what I'll do a lot of times is, because I know that the skin's going to blend nicely, is I'll use lassos for this all day long. So I'm going to go hit L for lasso tool, which is already on. Actually, let's first of all image duplicate, because I never like working on original image data. Okay, so now that I'm on the copy, I'm going to go back to the original, and I'm actually going to close this before I accidentally save over it, which is not a good thing. So don't save. Okay, so now I got my copy. So I'm going to flatten this into one layer. Flatten. Okay, so I got my lasso tool as my selection. So I could probably get away with just the eye. Let me try just the eye, because I didn't touch the eyebrow. I just basically went up to here. So let me just select around the nose, around just as pretty close to the brow as possible. You always want to give some room to maneuver, right about here. Now I already have a 20 pixel feather, so it's going to be a nice soft transition. So I'm going to duplicate this onto its own layer. So does anybody remember the keyboard shortcut? Command J. Copy via duplicate. Excellent. So now it's actually on its own layer, as you'll see, the good eye. So let's take this and invert it. So I'm going to go Command T, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down Control, click, and then first I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this thing horizontal, right there, and then I'm going to drag it in place. Look at that. I'm going to apply this. Now, if our face is purely symmetrical, that's all I have to do, because all I did is flip it 180 degrees. I didn't do anything else. So I'm just going to apply it.
How did you flip it again?
Okay, I'll show you that in 1 second. So I'm just going to apply that. And then what I could do is if I want to make sure they match, the eyeballs line up, I use guides all the time. So if you go Command R, it activates your rulers on both sides. And the cool thing from rulers is you could drag out guides. So I'm just going to drag a horizontal guide out. I'm going to place it right under the very lid at the corner there, like right over here, so I know where the lid is. I did a pretty good job of eyeballing it, pun intended. Okay, so we're going to move this down. So I'm in V mode. Now, what's great about V, if you don't drag, you just use the arrows, you're using it in like 1 pixel dimensions and 1 pixel movement. So you have really fine control. And to me, that looks pretty dang even to me. So let's get rid of our guide for now. Let's go a little bit lower. Now you can see you get a little bit of a weird anomaly here. I could fix that by just cloning that out. So what I could do is I could flatten this image. And then we will get to, I'll hit the J key. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the patch tool, which looks like a little patch with some thread around it right over here. And I'm going to unlock this. And then we're just going to grab this little weird anomaly over here and go to some fresh skin area. So I'm just going to circle this around like this. And then I'm going to go to some fresh skin. And voila. You have, no one would know that wonky eye was originally existing. And this is the exact way that not only do you fix eyes, but you fix teeth. So if you're going to fix braces, make sure you have a bunch of photographs of people with clean teeth without braces. That's how it's done. You're not actually removing brace by brace and reconstructing teeth. No, you're grabbing actual clean teeth for somebody who doesn't have braces and you're popping it in their mouths. So that's the trick to that. So you got the polygonal lasso and the polygonal lasso and the magnetic lasso as well. So the polygonal lasso is really good for square objects. So let me go to choose different images. So let's go to bridge, and let me go to something where there's actually, for instance, something like this would be perfect. So take this image over here. And this is the crypt of Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin, if anybody's interested. Anybody saw the series The Tudors way back when, this is where they filmed a lot of the scenes. Okay, so you have this sort of tablet-y thing on the wall, right? And say if I wanted to make an active selection here to change the color of the tablet or whatever. And since it's a pretty square shape, the polygonal lasso works pretty well. So when you go into the polygonal lasso, I can just click on each corner, and every time I click, it makes another straight line from where I clicked. So this isn't the best because the top is actually a little curved, but to give you an idea of like if you want to fill a painting frame, this is a great way. And say now that I want to, say what I could do now is I could actually click and say I want to transform this even more. So let's do transform selection. And then I'm going to click, and then we're going to warp this. And remember at the top it said it's a little bowed out, so I could just take the top and sort of bow it out like this, so it matches the canvas behind it. Hit OK, so now I got a pretty good active selection. And say I wanted to change this into an inverse for some reason. I don't know why, but you could do all kinds of fun stuff. Let's change this into, say, invert. So it looks like a negative, a color negative. Or I could change this into, say I wanted to add some contrast to it. Let me get rid of the one below it, because I don't need it anymore. And say I wanted to pump up my highlights, and then drop down my shadows. Although I didn't have an active selection anymore, so that's why it's not working. Okay, now we got an active selection. So then I could go up and I could do, say, curves. Bring in my contrast. Do a little levels adjustment. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of the layer underneath it. the inversion layer because I don't need it. So, I mean, I know why I would do that, but it just adds a bit of contrast. So it looks like more like a papyrus scroll. I'm just making stuff up as I go as far as examples. But as you can see, it's a very quick way of making selections. Okay, and then we have the magnetic lasso tool, which sort of works. I know I've covered these before, but not everybody is new here, so I'm just going to run through. So we're really talking about selection tools today, so I just want to make sure that everybody knows what's going down. Let me get rid of these adjustment layers. I'm just dragging them to the trash can icon at the bottom of my layer palette. Okay, so with the magnetic lasso, it works as it sounds. So what it does is you basically start, and it's finding actually the space between that dark shadow on the left. And it's doing a pretty admirable job, but as you can see, it's not 100% perfect. It lost it there, so on and so forth. So if there's a really good disparity between color, for example, if I do, say, a new document, Command N for a new document. Okay, so let's make a nice, let's make a ball. So we'll grab our Marquee tool again, which is the second one down. We'll do elliptical. Since we want to make it round, I'm going to hold down my Shift key to constrain proportions. Actually, it's still on fixed ratio. That's why I'm not getting free. So I'm going to go to normal, and then I'm going to do it and hold down Shift, and this will actually make it round. Yep, there we go. Move this into the center, and let's fill this with a happy color. How about a nice green? Bob Ross would be very happy with that color. Okay, so let's try the magnetic lasso again. See how well it performs. Okay, so I'm going to grab it. Doing a pretty admirable job. Watch what happens when I pull away. See, it's still pulling back to the surface, but if I pull away too much, it loses grip. So it works pretty well, but it adds all these freaking points onto it. That happened because I was moving it around. But as you see, it's still not a very accurate selection, but it has its methods. So the quick selection and the magic wand, these I use very infrequently, just to know that the quick selection, one on top, is much more accurate. It's been much more updated since the legacy magic wand, which aptly is called the tragic wand, because it's actually a pretty poor performer. Although when you have pretty solid color like this, it works fairly well. So for example, with the magic wand, I got my selection. And then what I could do is, let's see how clean it is. I'm going to cut this green out of the white, and let's see if it removes everything. So the way you cut something out, so if you're going Command J is duplicate via copy, Shift Command J is duplicate via cut. So it's Shift Command J, and now it's on its own layer. So if I click over here, it actually looks pretty good because it's on its own. So I can't see any green edges over here, so it actually looks pretty good as far as the selection is concerned. So when you have really solid color like that, you can get away. Just as a little test, I just want to see if we get any worse or better selection with the tragic wand or the magic wand, which is W for wand. So we have the same thing. This should work almost identically. So we're going to do Shift Command J onto its own layer. Okay. And yeah, it looks really clean. So you can get away with some pretty clean selections as long as there's a perfectly clean edge and two colors. If you're getting into stuff where things, because in real life things have like thousands of colors in them, your eyes don't really equate to it. But a leaf, I mean, because of the transparency, it's not just one color green like a plastic green plant. It actually has different parts of thicker, so some parts are darker green, some parts are lighter green. Same thing with our skin, because our skin's transparent, light shines through it. When you have something heavily backlit, you could actually see the ears glow orange because you're actually seeing the light shine through them. All those things are what make things look real. So when you get to this, tools like this, they don't get very accurate when you start getting multiple colors. Okay, so moving down our selection, let's do the crop tool quick. So let me go back to my bridge. And let's open up a picture of our Friedman, which is my mythical creature that I manufactured in Photoshop. Bottom part is fur seal, top part is king penguin, if anybody's curious. Okay, so the crop tool, so I'm just going to image, I'm going to duplicate again. I don't want to work on original images because otherwise I tend to get lost. So I'm going to close the original. Now I'm left with the copy. Okay, so say I wanted to crop out some of this background. So the crop tool, pretty simple. As you're pulling in, you could actually see where you're going to crop. The cool thing about the crop tool as well is if you go towards the outside and you hold, you could rotate. And as soon as you do that, it adds a grid, so you could actually line it up with the grid. So say I wanted to line the penguin's body vertically on the right-hand side, so where the beak is coming out, I want to line it up with one of the vertical. That looks pretty good. So now it looks really straight up and down. So now if I drag this crop mark to the very borders to maintain as much image area as possible, and I'll apply the crop, I'll show you what it looks like. So now, before he's facing backwards a bit, but now he's actually up, so now his chest is actually pretty parallel with the right side of the frame. But that's the crop tool. Pretty straightforward. Eyedropper. Now, a lot of these tools, like the crop tool, they have multiple tools under it. Perspective crop is similar, and I'll show you that. So when you're doing perspective crop, it gives you these corner handles, so you could change perspective. So if we choose something, I got a better image to show you that. So let me go back to Bridge. And let's go to something that's a little more architectural in design. St. James Gate Org, I think we'll use that one. Okay, so this is outside of the Guinness factory. St. James Gate. Okay, so with architecture, obviously you want things going straight. I was pretty low, so I got my verticals pretty straight, but say I wanted to crop this accordingly. So with the perspective crop tool, if I draw this out, and now I could actually change my perspective. So if I pull this in like this, let me close this, and then I pull this in like this, about the same amount. I want to show you guys what happens. Okay, now if I apply this, ta-da! See how it pulled the images out. So if you ever, the reason why that is when we're taking pictures with a standard DSLR point shoot, what have you, that's not a view camera, your lens axis and your film axis is always parallel. So if you have a tall building and you're pointing the camera up, so now your lens axis and your film axis is no longer parallel to the building that you're photographing because you're pointing it up. With a view camera, you could raise the front lens separately with those bellows. So still your lens plane, your film plane, and your subject plane are all parallel, so therefore you have no geometric distortion. But us humans who are not bringing around, whenever we travel, these big view cameras, these big elaborate cameras, we could actually correct perspective just like that. So if you have diverging or converging lines, you could just choose that crop, move it in, and do things, of course, that way. So that's what you would use the perspective for. Slice tool, never worry about the slice tool. The slice tool on top and bottom, those are for old school web design. Back when we had dial-up, those days when those, the modems made all those horrible racket noises, because an image might have been so big for that old school technology pre-broadband that they might have 2 or 3 different servers serving up the same image to load on your website. So what you'd actually do is slice that image or slice your page up to multiple slices so it'll load faster because it's coming from many different sources. So don't worry about it unless you're a web designer. Now we're going to move on to the eyedropper tool. So the eyedropper tool, as we know, it samples stuff. And the cool thing is see as I'm holding and dragging, so the top bar is the color you're actually sampling. So if I go up to the green, see it's like sort of greeny like this ochre. The blue, then you got the gold from the Guinness, so on and so forth, so you can see which color you're sampling. Pretty straightforward. And it changes live in your color sampler as well as you're going, or you could throw some like dark red. Then we have the 3D material. Don't worry about that unless you're doing 3D. Photoshop CC does have some 3D, which I'm going to cover in the last class, just some really basic tech stuff. But you can do some fun 3D. If you don't have 3D software and you do some really fun titles and stuff, I'll show you how to do that in the last class. But that is pretty cool. The color sampler comes in handy all the time. I use the color sampler often. So for example, say I'm trying to match 2 colors together. Say I wanted to match, say, this brick color to that brick color. I'm just giving an example. So what I could do is I could zoom in really tight, and I could sample this color. So as soon as I click it, it opens up this dialog box. Now I could add up to 4 samplers. Actually, let's say I wanted to make that brick the same color as the Guinness logo on the St. James Gate. So what I could do here is sample my second. And then I could look, and then I could get my RGB values. So with adjustment layers, I could turn one of this brick into the same exact RGB values, so I know which colors I'm dealing with. So that's what's great about color samplers, is because you could have up to 4, and they're always active, and comparing one color tone to the other. That's why I do use them. Okay, so what you could do is, when you do that, they'll actually be labeled, and you could actually get rid of them. I'm just going to undo for now. Okay, good. Now, the ruler tool. The ruler tool does exactly what it says, in the sense that it measures stuff, which is cool. That's what rulers do, right? It does. It measures stuff. So say I wanted to measure this gate, I could actually click here, measure across the gate, and length is 13.3 centimeters. So if I'm trying to work perspectives and stuff, I could use it as a measuring tool. But what most people use this thing for is the following. Now this is a trick. People who've seen me before probably already know this, but people who don't, I might just blow your mind. Okay, so now you're in the ruler tool. So what we can do is say arbitrarily that this image, I'm just going to give it a quick rotation, make it a little smaller. Command T, actually, let's do crop. Let's go back to my normal crop tool, see? Okay, so I'm just going to give it a little rotation. So say arbitrarily, this is the way my image was. Okay, it's a little crooked. So, can anybody off the top of my head tell me what exact angle this is off of perfectly horizontal? Nobody? Okay, the ruler tool could do that for you. So click on your ruler tool. Draw either on whatever it's supposed to be, either vertical or horizontal, doesn't even matter. So this case is horizontal. So I'm going to draw, so I know that that gate is supposed to be horizontal. So I draw right along the line, and then I go to image, I go to image rotation, and I go to arbitrary, and look at that. It not only knows how much it has to correct, but in which direction it needs to correct. So it's already filled this in for me, angle, 5.51 degrees, and counterclock. So if I click OK, dun, 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 now it's exactly straight again. So now if I want to, I could hit C and I could recrop out the parts. So, and it works for verticals as well. So I could have just easily, let me undo this. So I could have just as easily done, okay, well, I know that these slats in the Guinness should be straight as well. So let's do the same thing, make sure we're on our ruler. And I'm going to draw straight line across one of these slats. Ta-da. And then I'm going to go image, image rotation, arbitrary. And see, I wasn't as exact, so this is 6.23, so it's a little bit of 1 degree difference. Again, the gate might not be perfectly straight, or this thing on top is probably sagging down after God knows how many years it's been sitting up there. That number might be level anyway, but to the human eye, at least, that Guinness does look level again. So I just wanted to show you the cool little feature. And that's a tip you'll use probably all the time. Let me close this before saving. Okay. Let's get into the fun sort of retouching tools. Let me open up a human here, because unless you're really good with feather work and penguins, I'm just closing some of these images. Okay. Actually, let me go to Victoria, because her skin is almost too perfect for this. Here we go. We've got some blemishes going on here, as you can see. Okay, so let's go into some of our healing tools. So the first thing we're going to use spot healing. Okay. The cool thing about spot healing is it's really, really quick. So, And the other cool thing about spot healing is it'll work on a transparent layer. Some of these effects work on transparent layers, others work on pixel-based layers, such as this particular tool does work on transparent layers, which is great. So I'm not doing any adjustments on the actual image layer underneath, and I'm doing it all on its own adjustment layer. So I can turn that on or off, as you can see. And it's as simple as just finding a blemish and making your brush approximately the size of that blemish, and it's going to compare neighboring pixels, and it'll do a pretty admirable job for tune-ups, for quick touch-ups. So that's a little too zoomed in. Let me just do a couple of quick ones. I'll show you the befores and afters. So we're going to do this. So if you have a couple of little quick blemishes, this is one quick way of doing it. You just want to definitely make it big enough so you surround the whole blemish area. So before and after, see, blink, on and off. So that's a pretty quick way. Okay. That doesn't work all the time, however. Then you can go to the healing brush. Now, what's nice about the healing brush is the healing brush actually gives you the ability to sample a specific area. So when you're using the spot healing, it's always going to use the very surrounding areas. But for instance, say I like her, say her skin texture is better, or the skin texture is finer on her nose. Say I want to transfer some of that over to these blemish areas. Well, now by holding the Option key, I could actually select the area. So I'm going to hold the Option key, say down here, and then I could paint that texture over here, or over here, or wherever I want. So, and that is the cool thing about using the healing brush, is because you could sample. Now I'm going to go into the patch tool. The patch tool is probably one of the best things if you want to really get rid of those sort of like under eye wrinkles you could do real quick. That's one thing that you could do very quick. For instance, on this eye here, there's so many ways of doing this. I'm just going to do sort of a down and dirty way. However, the disadvantage of doing the patch tool is if you notice the patch tool, I actually have to steal some, this should, see how it says, could not use the patch tool because selected area is empty, because I'm on an empty layer. This won't work. It has to be a pixel-based layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab Victoria, and I'm going to duplicate her on a new layer, Command J, copy via duplicate. And now since I'm, sorry, I had an active selection, Command J, there we go, we have an actual image-based layer. And now when I reach below here, grab this, and then I pull, oh, okay. Okay, something I forgot to mention about smart objects, which I'll do. So smart objects are great as long as you're not doing any painting or any pixel manipulation. When you do, you actually have to rasterize that layer. So that's in just double click, and you'll get the option to rasterize layer, so which I'll do here. So now that I have a rasterized layer, now I'll be able to take my take my tool, and I can pull it down to some fresh skin area, and it sort of blends that together, and then I'll reduce that to about 50% of the original. So, and this is just a down and dirty way, but see how it blended that lid into the skin underneath? So you could do stuff like that with very quickly with that. Then we go further on, and we go into the Content Aware Move tool, which allows you to move objects, and it'll fill in with whatever content aware. And then the red eye tool, which basically all it does is it desaturates the red. So that sort of red eye is still there, but you're actually just sort of desaturating. That's all it's really doing. Then we'll move on to our brush tool. So as I mentioned before, the brush tool is one of the most powerful engines in the art world. Besides a program called Painter, Corel Painter, this is probably one of the most sophisticated brush engines out there. And you could do tons of stuff. You guys do calligraphy, you could do it, especially with the Wacom tablet, responds to angle and chisel point. So if you do calligraphy, whether you're everything from any of the Asian languages to Sanskrit, you could always, like write in Hindi, you could do everything in calligraphy. So you have a lot of freedom to do that with the text palette and using your brush palette. Under that, you have your pencil tool. The pencil has less options. So the pencil is just more of like a pencil as far as its behavior than a brush. You don't have all the brush options. Now we get to the cloning stamp. The cloning stamp is incredibly popular. And for a long time, this was the only tool you had to really work with skin and legacy. So the way the clone tool works is you option click the area that you want to sample from. And what I'm going to do is, let me just size my brush down a little bit. There we go. Just a little bit bigger than a blemish. So here I'm going to option click down here, right underneath it. And the cool thing about the clone stamp is the clone stamp will clone onto transparent layers. So I'm going to make sure this is on opacity is 100% because I want all of that detail. So I'm just going to quickly I'm just waiting for my computer to catch up for me. There we go. So, a couple of more blemishes and I'll show you what we got. Clean that up. And it's all, you have to be really judicious as far as what you're sampling and how heavy-handed you will or will not be. And a lot of this just comes with experience of doing it over and over again. It's not the most glamorous thing, but to show you the before and after, see? Bing, bing. Make some disappear. So that's a very common thing. And the cool thing is, when you're trying to use either the patch tool or the healing tool or the content aware tool, it hates radical differences in texture and or color. Like for instance, say I wanted to clean up the eyebrow line by cloning in some over the eyebrows. Like for instance over here. I could do this easy with the clone stamp. So I'm just going to sample and draw, sample and draw, and I'm going to just sort of sculpt her eyebrows by doing it this way. Now if I try, I'll show you what happens if I try to do this with before and after, see? And this is just quick sloppy work, but if I try to do that now with the J or the clone stamp, watch what happens. So if I try to use the healing brush and try to do that same thing when I'm going to sample some skin and try to cover some eyebrows, it does something really funky underneath. And as you see this transition, especially right here, if you see that, the dark mark, it does not like that. Whereas if I did the same thing with the S for the healing stamp, let's do the exact same thing. And that's, what's that?
Can you use the brush for that?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. So you could actually paint with texture, but I'm using actually the cloning stamp. So I'm going to clone right from around that area, and then we'll just fill that in. So that's going to be more natural. And I could cover anything, and it doesn't matter what the transition is. So that is basically the difference of should I use the newer healing brush or should I use the older clone stamp? And it really depends. When you're on a border with a lot of color or detail or conflicting colors and or textures, I would definitely go towards the clone stamp. But if you're a homogeneous color and pretty homogeneous texture, the healing brush is great because it really blends things together nicely. Okay. Eraser tool is just that. So for instance, say I want to erase some of the stuff I just did. So I'm using the eraser because I actually have an eraser, but you'd use your mouse. And see, I'm erasing the cloning that I just did on that layer. I'm bringing back those eyebrows. So I could just erase. Pretty simple. The gradient tool. The gradient tool comes in super, super handy, and I'm going to show you this specifically because I use this all the time when I am creating skies and black and whites. For instance, let me go back to my bridge. Let's find something with the sky. Actually, that works pretty well. Let me just see what else I have. Yeah, let's do this one. Okay, so the St. James Gate again. Just double click to open. Okay, using the tools we just discussed, let's try to make the sky a nice, happy little gradient. Well, let's see if we can do that. So the first thing I'm going to try is let's try color range first. So let's go into color range, select the sky, take off invert. Okay, remember, white selected, so I'm going to shift click And some of it, make sure I select in all the corners, because our eye might look as a homogeneous color, but in reality this is multiple different colors. So maybe bring the fuzziness down. It's too fuzzy. Let's bring it back down to about 60. That's pretty good, because if you look, the only thing that's really lighting up there is the that. So I've hit OK. Let's check out our selection. It's good, but it's not great. As you can see, it selected sort of this bridge between buildings. It also selected a bunch of that. Okay, so knowing that, that's not the best. Let me undo that. Okay, let's try something else. Let's try one of our wands. So W. Let's try the quick selection tool. That worked much better. Okay, so one click pretty much and I'm done. It has a pretty nice selection. Okay. Now, technically this is not perfect, because if you see back here, there's a piece of building that's actually selected in as well. So I could sort of manually deselect. So the way I could do that is if I hit L for my regular lasso tool. Now, whenever you want to add to a selection, you hold down your Shift key. Whenever you want to remove or subtract, not remove, subtract from your selection, you hold down your Alt key. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key. And actually, because this is a pretty square object, I am going to go to the Polygonal Lasso tool. Or as some people say, Polygonal Lasso tool. Okay, so since this is straight out, I'm going to just hold down the Alt key. I'm going to start over here at the top of that little corner, go to the corner of that building, come down past to the selected area. Good. Go back over, and then back to the top. Okay, so that's a more accurate selection. So now my marching ants are marching around that little building. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is let's create a solid color of sky. So do we want like a deep blue sky? Do we want a light blue sky? What do we want here? How about medium? Medium is good. So let's go to our adjustment layers, dark side of the moon icon, and let's put in a solid color. Okay, let's pick a medium blue. Somewhere around, I'm looking actually more for the light side, because I'll show you what to do with another adjustment layer and a gradient tool, which I was going to show. That's why I'm doing this. I'm going to make it darker. So that looks pretty good like that. Okay, so now we get a nice blue sky, right? Looks like summertime. Okay, granted, if you looked at this under a microscope, and if I really close in to 100%, you'll see that this selection is far from perfect. As you see, we sort of missed our building here, and technically, although it did quite an admirable job of selecting around this sort of trestle thing here, but it didn't select on the inside. So to do this properly, but it did a really nice job over here towards the building edges. But just to show you that these quick selections, and it depends, if you're going to post this as a 3x5 inch image on the web and you're never going to see any of this detail, don't worry about it. But me being a perfectionist, I would actually go in and make perfect selections. But anyway, let's get back to what I wanted to talk about, which is the lovely gradient tool. Okay, so the gradient tool, let's make a gradient that's light to dark. What I'm going to do is let's do this by applying a curves layer. Okay? So with the curves layer I want to do is I want to make like a light to dark gradient. This being the lightest part of the sky, which is where we want, but we want it to go darker. So let me change my curves to a different blending mode. Let's sort of go to multiply. Ooh, that gets a nice deep, summertime, nice blue. I like that color. Okay, but I don't want it to apply to the whole image. I want it just to apply towards the area. So what I could do is I could do a Shift-Command-G, and what that's going to do is going to apply just to the previous layer. It creates a clipping group. Sorry, Option-Command-G, and it creates this little arrow. So now it's applying just to the layer underneath it. But it's applying it to the whole, and I want it to be a little lighter. So now I have my gradient tool, and my layer mask is selected. Automatically it's going to choose white and black. So if I want to hold down the Shift key, it'll constrain it to only lines that are either perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key to do that. I'm going to drag my gradient down, and let's see what happens. Oh, I'm going to run gradient. I'm actually on a spherical gradient. I want it to be in a linear gradient, which is the first one. So let me try that again. So Shift, drag. Oh, look at that. That would have been more natural to be lighter, yeah, like that, with darker in a deep blue sky. I like that better, don't you guys? Or do you like it better the other way? The other way, I agree. Okay, so I'm just dragging two different directions. That's all. I'm dragging up or dragging down. And to change the direction, I could always click up here that says reverse. And then draw the same direction again, it will be opposite. So that is a cool way that we can make that, that really unboring sky. So if you saw it before, that's a pretty lackluster image. And now all of a sudden, that adds dynamics. Like, wow, you went there on a beautiful sunny day. It was a beautiful sunny day, but the camera's dynamic range is nowhere near what the human eyes could capture, so everything was blown out. Because the alley was quite dark, so as a result, it's trying to capture all this detail. It's a happy balance. Even these bricks over here on the top right side have like good 2 stops overexposed, but that sky is like 3 to 4 stops overexposed. Whereas our eyes, when I was looking at that on a beautiful, summer day, I was looking at them like, oh, that's a beautiful blue sky. But the camera doesn't capture that density. So now with a little bit of Photoshop magic, we have our gradient and our sky back. So the gradients are great, you could do that. And I use them all the time for creating like starbursts or something like that for a background. So for instance, say I'm gonna make a new image, I'm gonna pop a subject on there. What I could do is I can make like nice little starbursts. So I can make a black background, for example. So I'm gonna hit D, default, returns my 2 swatches to their default colors, black in foreground, white in the background. I'm going to fill it with black. Since it's the foreground, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Option Delete, fills with foreground color. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer. And in this layer, I'm going to go white, so Command Delete, and it's white. I'm going to add a layer mask to this, so I'm just going to click on the layer mask icon, which is between the dark side of the moon and the FX. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this with black to hide the effect. Done. And then what I'm going to do is hit G for gradient, which we're using, but this time instead of a linear gradient, I'm going to use a spherical gradient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the center, somewhere in the center, I'm going to drag out. Oh, I want to do it the other way, so I could drag in, or I could have just clicked on the reverse up here. So you can, let's go. There we go. So I could do like these nice little starburst patterns. And typical for portraiture, a lot of times I'll shoot somebody in green screen, and then I'll drop in these patterns. And you can get these really beautiful starbursts. And these are other ways of really capturing on the gradient tool. And if you want to go nuts with the gradient tool, you can actually go into the gradient editor, which is here, and you can actually make your own gradient swatch. For instance, if I select a new gradient, I'll quickly show you guys how to do some new gradients, and you could do some funky stuff. And this is really fun too for names. Okay, so let me go into the new gradient, and let's just type in test as a name. So if I click on the actual gradient itself, okay, so now you're in the gradient editor down here. So this is the one we just renamed. Okay, so you could click on these actual pieces over here and choose your actual colors that you want to work with. Like for instance, on top, say I want to select a different color. So say I want to do black to black. But if I want to add in a different I could option click and add some more control points in and choose some funky colors. So now I'm doing a black to red to black gradient, for example. And you could do this ad infinitum. And these little sliders are the transition areas. If you want to transition directly in the middle, leave them halfway between. If you want to transition more towards the end, you could do that. So one thing I might want to use this for is a lot of times text could be more interesting. So for instance, say I create some text. Let me create a new doc, Command N, okay. Let me hit T for text tool, and we could type something in, so I'll type in my name, Jason, make this bigger so you guys could actually see what I'm doing. So let's make this 72 point. Now you guys can see what I'm doing. somewhat centered, doesn't really have to be. And the cool thing is, when you double click on any layer, it opens up your layer styles. And the cool thing with your layer styles is it has almost all of these features in there. So we were talking about gradients. Let's go into a gradient overlay. And what you do is you can click on the gradient, and you can click on any of the gradients. So let's choose one of the pre-made ones. Say this fun, like Swedish colors, is yellow into blue. Hit OK. And you could change the orientation of which it is. For now, we have these sort of this double color, and this going horizontal. If I want this vertical, I could just change the angle to 0 degrees. But as you see, you guys could have tons of fun of changing colors using gradient tools. So that's what it's for. But primarily, when using it for layer masks, you could do beautiful, smooth transitions, and that's why it's used all the time. OK. OK, just a couple more tools, and then I'm going to take some questions. OK, so blur, sharpen, smudge. I don't use any of these. So blur, of course, is using a blur tool locally. It's like basically loading up a brush with blur, and you could blur a localized thing. For me, the way I'd rather do this is the following. I'll show you an example. So let's open up. Let's open up this guy over here. Okay, so say there's way too much texture in his hood of his hoodie, for example. So what I could do is I could go to the blur tool. I could leave it on 100%. I could make my brush much, much bigger. That's actually too big. That's why I can't see it. And see, I could actually paint in localized blur. You see that blurry spot? Now the problem is that's it, I'm done. Now I can't go back unless I keep undoing it or paint back with history, I can't undo it. So this is not my preferred method. If I wanted to blur it like that, it's much better. Duplicate your background, copy, Command J, duplicate via copy, and then I can blur this whole layer, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And now I can control the quantity of it as well. So let me just do a 20 pixel blur. And then what I could do is I could add a layer mask, fill it with black to hide the effect. So alternate delete, fill with foreground color, which happens to be black. And now when I punch through with a white brush, now that's quite a bit more blurred than before. But if I reduce the opacity, I could sort of get to that very same sort of amount of blurriness. And now I'm not doing any destructive editing. So I never use any of these tools because all destructive, everything can be done this way with layer masks and multiple layers. The dodge and burn tool. Okay, any of you guys actually work in a real photographic laboratory would know what these tools are. Okay, to dodge is to make something lighter, and to burn is to make something darker. Because for those of you who don't have the experience of actually working in a photographic darkroom, the longer you leave that piece of photographic sensitive paper under the light, it's like getting a tan, the darker it gets. So to dodge, for use that, so the light's coming out of your enlarger, right, with your image onto your paper. So if I'm going to hold back and make it lighter, I'll put my hand in front and I'll do something called dodging. I'm holding back the light, so that area will be lighter. Or what I'll do is I'll hold back all the light except for one area which will shine through longer, which will burn in and get darker. So that's where the terms come from. And to give you an idea of how these tools work, let's start with our dodge tool, which usually is like a little paddle. It's like a little circle with a paddle. A lot of people make their own. Okay, so remember, dodge makes things lighter. So first of all, you have a range. So let's choose our midtones, because blue is somewhat in the middle. Exposure is how much it does it. So let's go to say like 100%. And they also have to be in a pixel-based layer for me to do this. So let me go in here and set layer masks. We could actually technically dodge and burn on other things as well. Protect tones. And you got to get the right sort of tonality for these things to work. Shadows, let's go to midtones. Come on. Actually, let me get rid of this layer. Just do this on the background. Okay. There we go. As you see, the more I do it, the lighter it gets. See? Lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. So you can control how quickly that builds up by doing exposure, also by which area. This is pretty dark, so it's going to be probably under or middle, so it's pretty much mid-tones. Now, if I have sort of like shadows selected, and I try to do like dodging on the skin, it'll do it less because there's not that many shadows. However, if I pick a shadow tone like his jacket, it'll be much more effective. See, I could actually paint in specular highlights if I want to do onto parts of his leather, and I could really make his jacket pop if I wanted to. So I can make the buttons pop, just paint it in and lighten it. And conversely, the burn tool will make things darker, so I could actually darken things. And this is a quick way to do localized doing. But whenever you use the dodge and burn tool, I always advocate that you duplicate it onto its own layer. So in this case, I just did this on the pixel-based layer, which is not something I would ever do. I would duplicate it via copy onto its own layer, and that's the way I would do it on a separate layer. So for instance, if let me undo this a couple of times. Bing, 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 bing. Okay, until that effect is gone. Okay. So the cool thing about if I duplicated this layer, or the area that I want to apply this to, so let's say I want to lighten the hoodie just a bit. So I'm going to go to my dodge tool. I'm just going to paint over the hoodie area and just lighten it up. But say I want to leave it dark for some reason there, or put a logo or whatever, I could add a layer mask to that layer. And then what I could do is I could paint with black. As you can see, I'm painting back, so it's holding back the effect. So I could paint that area down. So I want to leave a little dark in the center. And now if I want to blend that, I could always do filter, blur, Gaussian blur. So I'm blurring just a layer mask, and I'm doing enough where those edges are not really discernible anymore. There, that's a little too much. Let's bring it down to about 30 pixels or so. And so if you can see here, I'm lightening just the around of the hood. So, dodge and burn. Okay. So, the pen tool went over last time, but this is the tool of all tools. I highly recommend that you folks practice. So, for instance, if I wanted to select this guitar with my pen tool, I'm just going to do a super quick, like just let you get this shape. I could just start over here and come down with my points, with my Bezier curves, and I could do beautiful selections. And that just gives you an idea of how quick, and then I can edit them on top of that. And we'll do that some more as we go. Text tool creates text. It's pretty straightforward too. And the direct selection tool is for paths. So say, let me go back to my pen tool. So say I make a quick path, which that is right over here. So the way these work is the path selection tool, the black arrow, selects the entire path and allows me to move it. Whereas the white one, the white arrow, is a direct selection tool that lets me to select my direct points and modify them and edit them. So when I'm trying to modify it, I will use the white tool. And when I want to move, if I need to move the entire path, I will select the black tool. The shapes we went over before, and your rectangles, rounded rectangles, ellipse, polygon lines, and of course the custom shape tool. And then your hand tool moves around, but you don't actually need to really move your hands because I always use my space bar to actually move the image around. So you could just click, hold down the space bar, click and drag. It's a much easier way. I mean, you could always quickly go to your hand and then physically move it around, but I rather leave it in like a different tool, move it, and then have that other tool active. So that basically covers almost all the tools you use. Well, I thank you so much. It has been a blast.